By the spring of 2014, nearly 1 year had passed since the murder of Bardstown police officer Jason Ellis. Throughout the region, everyone is suspect, not only of strangers, but the people they know. The region itself has a population just above 11,000, and the residents of Bardstown would remain skeptical of their neighbors, colleagues, and other associates. That skepticism would continue to mount throughout 2014, when another shocking crime brought Bardstown to the forefront of Kentucky headlines. This time, the crime was a savage double murder that would be every bit as tragic, and even more barbaric, than the ambush of Officer Ellis from the year beforehand. This is the story of Kathy and Samantha Netherland. Welcome to Unresolved. I am your host, Michael Whelan. In case you did not pick up in the introduction, this story is a direct successor to the last episode, which itself was a revisiting of a story that I covered on the podcast years ago. This entire series is a re-exploration of the mysterious crimes plaguing Bardstown, Kentucky, which is beginning to grow from the original 2 episodes I put together back in 2016, to a much more explanatory and detailed series. However, before we get into that, I'd like to briefly tell you how you can help support this podcast, Unresolved. If you would like to support the show, please consider heading to patreon.com/unresolvedpod. There, you could get access to commercial-free episodes, bonus episodes, and more. Once again, that's patreon.com/unresolvedpod. To learn more about the show, just listen through to the close of this episode or visit the podcast website, which is unresolved.me. Once again, that's unresolved.me. Now, let's turn back the dial and learn more about the 2 people at the heart of today's episode, Kathy and Samantha Netherland. Kathy Hardin was born on September 7th, 1965, in Shelbyville, Kentucky, just outside of Louisville, about an hour north of the town she would eventually settle down in, Bardstown. Kathy spent a good chunk of her early life working towards her education. She would obtain master's degrees in vocational rehabilitation and family studies from the University of Kentucky, and then honed in on her true passion, special education, with another master's degree from Campbellsville University. Kathy would become a special education teacher who spent 7 years at Bardstown Elementary School doing just that. She worked primarily with 5th graders, but was known to help out however she could. She was rumored to have taught one of Jason Ellis' sons, Hunter Ellis, who has Down syndrome, but that might just be some local unconfirmed gossip. What we do know for a fact is that Kathy loved her job, and participated in many extracurricular events, such as volunteering and donating to the Special Olympics. The principal of Bardstown Elementary School, Paul Bowling, recalled that, quote, "Kathy was an energetic teacher. She put a lot of energy into helping her kids and was very passionate about what she did." It is very possible that Kathy rubbed elbows with the wife of Jason Ellis, Amy, who often worked as a substitute teacher at the school. In addition to being a hardworking special education teacher, Kathy was also a devoted wife, mother, and Christian. She attended Parkway Baptist Church every Sunday along with her husband of many years, Robert Netherland, and their 2 daughters, Holly and Samantha. Tragically, Kathy's relationship with Robert was cut short in July of 2013 when he died of colon cancer. Robert, who almost everyone called Bob, was a loving father, husband, and friend, and his loss impacted everyone in the family equally. When Bob Netherland passed away, Holly, the oldest daughter, was preparing for her sophomore year at a university approximately 2 hours away. Their youngest daughter, Samantha, was still in high school. Samantha Netherland was born on December 20th, 1997. In the spring of 2014, Samantha was just 16 years old and was a sophomore at Bardstown High School. She was highly regarded as being one of the best students in her entire class, and was a member of multiple clubs and organizations, including the academic team, Women in Science, the Adventure Club, the Young Leaders Club, and she even sang in the school's honor choir. Samantha had recently been accepted into the Gatton Academy program, an affiliate of Western Kentucky University. It was an early college entrance program, which required good grades and plenty of extracurriculars. At the beginning of spring, 48-year-old Kathy Netherland had actually spoken to a reporter with the Kentucky Standard about Samantha's acceptance into the program. Quote, "I'm very excited for her. This was her goal and her dream, and despite everything that has happened over the past year with the loss of her father, she did this on her own. I couldn't be prouder of her." It wasn't exactly a well-kept secret that Samantha had a very bright future ahead of her, and she personally dreamed of being a marine biologist. In particular, she hoped to work at a place like the Newport Aquarium, which she had visited the year prior and fell in love with. But in addition to being known as a pretty great student, Samantha was also known for being a regular teenager who loved hanging out with friends, playing video games, and headbanging to 80s hair metal. Her older sister, Holly, recalls that Samantha could identify each Def Leppard song from its opening guitar riff. Up until April 21st, 2014, all seemed to be normal with the Netherland family. Holly was away at school, preparing to wrap up her sophomore year of college, and Samantha was preparing for her high school prom later that month. Her mother and her had just gone shopping for her dress and jewelry the weekend prior, and Kathy had posted pictures of it all to her personal Facebook account. However, unbeknownst to the Netherlands and their loved ones, something dark was afoot. On the morning of April 22nd, 2014, a Tuesday, both Kathy and Samantha failed to show up to school. Their absence was noted, but it wasn't until their two schools, Bardstown Elementary and Bardstown High School, began to communicate with one another that they pointed out how odd this was. Samantha was a very punctual student, but Kathy, in particular, was never even late without a phone call. For her to be absent entirely, something had to be terribly wrong. School officials began reaching out to the Netherlands' loved ones, eventually making contact with Kathy's father, Samantha's grandfather, Norris Hardin. He was asked to check in on them from his end and make sure that everything was all right. Norris Hardin stopped by the Netherlands' home at 5120 Springfield Road, just outside of Bardstown, in a small suburb named Botland. When he pulled up to the house, he noticed that Kathy's car was still in the driveway, indicating that both she and Samantha were inside. Norris made the decision to enter the home, and inside, he found the bodies of both Kathy and Samantha, who had been brutally murdered for an unknown reason. Stepping outside, he phoned police, and soon, word began to spread throughout this small town. Stacy Hibbard, Kathy's sister, arrived at the scene a short time later. When she got to the Netherlands home, she found cop cars lining the street, and police tape wrapped around the crime scene, which now encompassed the entire house. At the scene, she saw her father was in apparent distress, and later noted during a press conference, quote, "They're gone, and somebody did something terrible to them."
The nightmare began on April 22nd, around 10 in the morning, when I received a phone call. The only thing that I could understand was that my sister Kathy and my niece Samantha were dead. At first it was unthinkable. My mind refused to believe it. There was no way Kathy and Samantha were gone. Then as reality set in, I begged God to make it untrue. How could they be gone when less than a year earlier they had buried Bob, Kathy's husband of 25 years, and father to Samantha and her older sister Holly? There had been 4 in their family before Bob died from colon cancer. When he died in July 2013, I watched my sister in complete awe at her strength and dignity through the toughest of times, putting her own grief aside to be there for her 2 darling daughters. Now the family has been cut down to 1, Holly, safely away at college, but still blissfully unaware that she has just become an orphan. I have done nothing harder in my life than tell Holly that her mother and sister were dead. In those horrible moments as I drove to Kathy's house, I tried imagining what kind of accident could have taken both of them. Nothing made sense. And nothing could prepare me for what I saw as I arrived at Kathy's house: a mass of police cars, and what seemed like a million blue lights. It took only seconds for me to learn there was no tragic accident, and my sister and niece had not died peacefully in their sleep. No, they had been murdered, attacked and killed violently the evening before in broad daylight in the one place that they should have felt safe. Only a few days earlier, Kathy had sent me a text. It read, "What does your schedule look like for Saturday, April 26th? Samantha is going to the prom." Kathy wanted me to help Samantha get ready for her big night. I enthusiastically agreed and wrote back, "I'm so excited for her. She's really having a great year and certainly deserves it." Kathy wrote back, she told me the other night that this has been the best school year she ever had. 3 days later, Kathy texted me again. This time there was a picture. It was Samantha in her prom dress, the one that she had picked out. This picture represents the last time that I saw Samantha alive. Kathy's text was the last time I talked to her. 2 days after Kathy and Samantha picked out her prom dress, they were dead. So on Thursday and Friday, instead of working on Samantha's hair and makeup, our family was picking out caskets for her and her mother. We were deciding when to have their funerals. Saturday made the most sense, but that was prom night. It was impossible to comprehend burying Kathy and Samantha on what should have been such a happy night. We buried Samantha in her prom dress. It seemed fitting that she should get to wear her pretty dress at least once. She looked beautiful in it, which was surprising. Not because she wasn't a beautiful girl, but because of the injuries that were inflicted upon her in the vicious attack that led to her death. Samantha fought for her life, and whoever killed her showed her no mercy, attacking a kind and gentle girl with brutal viciousness and ferocity, leaving her broken and battered, nothing like the happy young girl in this photo. Whoever killed Samantha was only slightly less cruel to her mother, Kathy. As parents, we pray that Kathy died first and died quickly, so she didn't have to witness the vicious death her child suffered. We are here today to remember Kathy and Samantha, and that it has been 3 months since they were taken from us. The pain has settled in, not quite as suffocating as it was in the beginning. We love them and we miss them every day. We would like to give our thanks publicly for the kindness, support, and privacy you've extended to us. It has helped each of us tremendously. The immense love that you've shown for Kathy and Samantha allows us to focus on the wonderful people they were. It reminds us that their lives are so much more than the evil that visited them on that sunny Monday evening. We'd also like to thank the Kentucky State Police and all law enforcement working on this investigation. They have worked tirelessly to find Kathy and Samantha's killer or killers. But with all of the days of support and hard work, the reality is that a murderer walks free, possibly on the same streets as you. Kathy and Samantha were two remarkable women, but they lived very ordinary lives. Lives like yours, your sisters, your mothers, and your daughters. There are no words that can describe what this feels. I hope no other family ever has to stand outside their loved one's house, knowing that their sister and their niece are lying dead inside, just steps away, but completely unreachable. Today we are here to say thank you, but to also ask for your help. The police identified a black Chevy Impala within days of the murder. To date, no one has come forward to identify the car or who was in it. That car may be the key to solving this terrible crime. Any information that you have, even the slightest detail, is important. Please call the Kentucky State Police. Again, thank you for what you've done. Kathy and Samantha have reached the angels and are reunited with Bob. I like to imagine the three of them are watching over Holly as she wakes each day without them. When you pray for them, please pray and say a prayer that someone will have the courage and strength to come forward and shed light on this terrible crime. Thank you.
In the wake of the region's second high-profile murder case in a single year, the area surrounding Bardstown was shocked. Those especially close to Kathy and Samantha Netherland were horrified. Ashley Smith, the co-owner of 150 Quick Stop, a convenience store about half a mile up the road from the Netherlands' home, told a local reporter, quote, "It's very unsettling, especially in this community. You've got a lot of good, honest, hardworking people around here. You just don't hear of this kind of thing happening. You just don't." Counselors were dispatched to Bardstown schools to provide counseling, not only for the students that knew and loved both of the Netherlands, but staff that struggled to make sense of this heinous crime. Paul Bowling, the principal of Bardstown Elementary, stated, quote, "We're trying to help the kids process the news and process ourselves. Many kids have had ideas for events. We're going to talk about that in the coming days. Kathy did bring so much to our schools. She was not only a good teacher, but she was also a great person." Chris Pickett, the principal of Bardstown High School, remembered Samantha along with the staff and the student body. He recalled that Samantha had entered the school as a shy and quiet girl, but had begun to blossom into a smart, confident, witty, and fun-loving young woman who wasn't afraid to belt out vocals during choir concerts. Quote, "Samantha was an outstanding, wonderful young lady. She was gifted academically and musically. She was someone you wanted to be friends with." The person hit hardest by the news of Kathy and Samantha's passing was none other than Holly Netherland, the only remaining member of the Netherlands' four-person family. In less than a year, Holly, who was only 19 years old and had been away at college, had lost her father to cancer and now her mother and sister to a senseless murder. Speaking to the press, Holly stated, quote, "On April 22nd, I received a phone call that shattered my life. My mother and my sister were dead. The first thought that ran through my head was, God, you can't take them. You took my daddy. You can't have them too." The funeral for Kathy and Samantha Netherland was held on April 28, 2014, the following Monday, at Parkway Baptist Church, the same church that Kathy and her family had been attending for years. 2 days later, on April 30th, Kathy and Samantha were buried in the local Bardstown City Cemetery, right next to Robert Netherland, who had been waiting for them for about a year. Barbara Donahue, Kathy's aunt and Samantha's great-aunt, revealed that Samantha would be buried in the prom dress she had picked out the weekend prior to her death. Her family wanted her to be able to wear it at least once. Barbara stated, quote, "She was going to go to the prom this weekend, had her dress, shoes, earrings, everything laid out to go, and now this has all come to an end." A memorial for the Netherlands was held on May 2nd, 2014, in which fellow staff members and students, as well as other colleagues and loved ones, assembled to release purple and baby blue balloons into the sky. Purple was Kathy's favorite color, and baby blue was Samantha's. As everyone lifted the balloons into the air, Samantha's favorite Def Leppard song provided the soundtrack to this act of finality. The investigation into the murders of Kathy and Samantha Netherland were overseen by the Kentucky State Police, the same organization that had been heading the investigation into Officer Jason Ellis' death for the past 11 months. From the get-go, police believed that the crime had unfolded at around sunset on the day in question, April 21st, 2014. This estimate put the murder at around 8 p.m. that Monday evening, which was right around the time that night was falling. The death certificates for both Kathy and Samantha were released approximately 2 months after the murders, in June of 2014, and revealed that the two had been the victims of a horrific attack. 48-year-old Kathy had been shot multiple times, although police would never release the extent of these gunshots. The type of gun and ammunition remains confidential. However, the death certificate also revealed that Kathy had a deep cut on her neck, indicating that an assault had taken place. Meanwhile, 16-year-old Samantha seemed to have been the primary target of the unknown subject's aggression. Prior to her death, she had been beaten severely and had suffered serious wounds to her head. Her cause of death seemed to be a significant slash to her neck. It was believed that the mother and daughter had been in separate rooms when they were attacked and/or murdered, indicating that there might have been multiple attackers. Because each crime was so violent, it seemed impossible for one culprit to have been behind both. As for an easily apparent motive, investigators were stumped. Nothing of value seemed to be missing from the home. At least, nothing of importance. No prescription drugs, jewelry, or electronics were noted as being missing. This led investigators to believe that the two murders, which were exceptionally violent, were personal in nature. Detectives also theorized that the crimes had unfolded over a very short period of time, just 10 or so minutes. The killer or killers had likely planned it out ahead of time, arriving to the scene, doing the deed, and then leaving. One of the only leads that investigators would float to the public was a vehicle seen leaving the area at around the time they believed the murders took place. This vehicle was just one of 3 caught by witnesses and security cameras heading north towards Bardstown from Botland, the small suburb that Kathy and Samantha Netherland lived in. However, out of these 3 vehicles, only one would remain unidentified in the following months. This vehicle was a newer 2006 to 2013 model black Chevy Impala. This vehicle had been caught by security cameras leaving the area shortly after 8 p.m., when police believed the unknown killers had struck. This vehicle had also been spotted by witnesses that lived in the neighborhood of the crime scene. A couple of images of this car would be circulated to the press, shots taken from a nearby convenience store's security camera. Jeff Gregory, a Kentucky State Police trooper, revealed that the police were not able to make out the vehicle's license plate due to the angle it was driving and the extent of the security cameras. However, he was able to reveal some information about the black Chevy Impala and what it could mean for the investigation. Quote, "The vehicle does not appear to have a chrome strip or a rear spoiler, and may have a small antenna mounted above the center of the rear windshield. At the time, the windows did not appear to be tinted. We still believe that if we can find that car, we can solve the case." Despite there being very little information publicly released about this case, many online have continued to theorize about who would have targeted Kathy and Samantha Netherland, and why. One lead in particular was brought forth on a web sleuth forum by a user named Muy Curioso. This user had been combing through the social media pages of both Kathy and Samantha, and discovered an incident that Kathy Netherland detailed in a New Year's Eve Facebook post, just about 4 months before her eventual murder. It details a bizarre event she had while hanging out at home with both of her daughters, not only Samantha, but Holly, who was likely home for winter break. Her post reads as follows. "Earlier this afternoon we heard a noise. I thought one of our 2 cats had knocked over something. We didn't find anything disturbed, so we thought it was nothing. Boy, were we wrong. A little while ago, Holly opens our front door to go outside to pick up the mail and finds both glass panes in our screen door shattered. We have taken pics and I have carefully removed loose pieces of glass and the glass frames. All the shattered glass pieces have been swept up off the front porch. Guess I'll be heading to Lowe's tomorrow to find replacements. Crazy how unexpected events happen." This post seemed to detail how both glass panes on the Netherlands' front door had simultaneously shattered, for an unknown reason. Immediately, Facebook friends of Kathy began to suspect that there might have been some funny business involved, but she seemed to brush off those concerns, replying, "I don't think it was foul play. There was no rock or anything like that on the porch. There wasn't any damage to the wood door panes either. There were window clings that said Merry Christmas, but I don't think anyone in this area would be bothered by that. I think it was a fluke wind that caught the door and broke the window." So, Kathy seemed to suspect that a rogue gust of wind was the culprit behind the shattered glass door. She seemed to double down on that in another response, when asked about a potential cause, and stating, "We're not sure. I think it wasn't latched and the wind must have caught it. The door frame is fine, but the glass in both the top and bottom panes were shattered. Glass was all over the porch." The web sleuth user that discovered this Facebook post, again nicknamed Muy Curioso, thought it was an interesting lead and decided to follow up on it. They actually examined the weather patterns for the region and discovered that there were no reported gusts of wind on the day this incident was reported, December 31st, 2013. In fact, in the Bardstown region, the recorded wind patterns were actually well below the monthly average, making it an overall less windy day than normal. Even if it was a rogue gust of wind, it remains highly unlikely that it would have been powerful enough to have slammed the door hard enough to break both panes of glass. If you've ever tried to break glass, you'll know that those panes don't break so easily. Freak accidents do happen, of course, but those glass panes are usually designed to withstand a decent amount of force. In this web sleuth forum, users also pointed out that Kathy had taken a picture of her front door on Christmas Day to highlight her Christmas decorations. In this photo, there was no visible damage to the front door. The glass panes were intact, and the wooden panes surrounding the door were in tip-top shape. Fast forward a few months, however, and you'll notice from crime scene photos that there is some significant damage to the wood paneling just outside of the Netherlands' front door. This indicates that there might have been some damage done to the front entrance of the home, perhaps by the culprits trying to gain entrance, either before or during the murder. Investigators have refused to release many details about the investigation into this violent double murder, because it is understandably an open case. However, I think it remains a real possibility that whoever was responsible for the crime had scoped out the scene ahead of time. Police have publicly theorized that the killer knew what they were doing, and quickly conducted the crime in a timely manner. Perhaps they had tried to damage the front of the home to gain entrance or attract attention. Or maybe they wanted to judge the reaction time of the Netherland women. It's just a theory, I admit, but a valid one. After all, we know that criminals like the Golden State Killer committed similar crimes when he was scoping out his victims. Hopefully, time will tell whether or not this theory is just a red herring. Over the past year or so, the murders of Kathy and Samantha Netherland have received a healthy splash of publicity. Their case was given attention in an Oxygen documentary series centered around another cold case from Bardstown, the disappearance of Crystal Rogers. Along with the ambush of Officer Jason Ellis, reporters tried to connect dots between the various unsolved crimes. In that docuseries, reporter Stephanie Bauer spoke with an anonymous prison inmate who did not want his identity to be revealed. He claimed that Kathy and Samantha were killed as part of a gang initiation, stating, quote, "Well, I know they was tortured. I know that they were tied to their chairs. I know that one of them had her throat slit. They was stabbed and one was shot. I know that trinkets were taken as trophies." This anonymous inmate also claimed that a cell phone jammer had been used to, quote, "kill all the signal in the house." Investigators actively involved with the case have been unable to confirm or deny any of these allegations. In particular, because some of these details are hard to verify without any physical proof. It is unknown whether or not a cell phone jammer could have been used, and whether or not a gang would have access to that kind of technology. But police also stated that there seemed to be nothing of importance missing from the home. The rest of the inmates' information seemed to be details that were already publicly known, with one exception: the location of chairs inside the house. That seemed to be a tantalizing detail, which police have refused to comment on. Holly, the only surviving member of the Netherland family, stated about this lead, quote, "I have been asked by the police about the relative location of chairs. This is one of those things that I'm not comfortable talking about. How they died is not one of the main things I want to think about." Holly Netherland, the only surviving family member of this small family, was left in a very poor spot at the time of the murders. She was attending college at the time, living roughly 2 hours away from home. She was informed via telephone that her mother and sister had been killed, and had to endure the stress of the end of her sophomore year, finals exams and all that, with the added grief of her family being murdered inside their home. To make matters worse, residents of the region began to speculate that Holly herself was responsible for this heinous crime. Because Bardstown is such a small and relatively isolated community, it was only a matter of time before local gossip began to overtake the actual investigation. We saw this following the murder of Officer Jason Ellis, when residents began to spread horrible rumors about his widow and her alleged love life. And we saw it with 19-year-old Holly Netherland as well. The motive, alleged by local gossip, was that Holly was trying to obtain insurance money following her father's death, which had been paid out to her mother less than a year prior. I don't think I need to say it, but this rumor is based on no factual information. Out of everyone in the Netherlands' orbit around the time of the murder, Holly was undoubtedly the person most heavily scrutinized by investigators, who look for a personal or financial motive to any crime. Virtually all investigations start with spouses and immediate family members, and then spread outwards. Holly was undoubtedly investigated by the Kentucky State Police, who looked for any kind of incentive or motive. They found none, and have stated that there is no evidence that Holly, or anyone she knew, had anything to do with this horrendous crime. In fact, the rumors were actually harmful to Holly Netherland, a 19-year-old that had lost her entire immediate family over the span of a single year. To try and put the rumors to bed, Holly donated roughly her entire inheritance, around $50,000, to the reward fund for information leading to an arrest. This reward fund, which started at around $2,500, skyrocketed to $50,000 in the following months, fueled primarily by Holly and her family, who began referring to the reward fund as quote-unquote Holly's inheritance. In the roughly half-decade since this crime unfolded, Holly has married and tried to move on with her life, but remains hopeful that answers can be found for her mother and her sister.
A year ago on April 22nd, I got a call that shattered my life. My mother and sister were dead. The first thought that ran through my head was, God, you can't take them. You took my daddy, you can't have them too. But no amount of begging, screaming, or crying was going to bring them back. Samantha, my Hoovian hooligan, the person who sat next to me and helped me beat the bosses of every video game I ever played, was gone. She was the only person I ever known that could name a Def Leppard song just by the first few chords. She's my little sister and my best friend. My mother, the woman who raised me, the person who put up with me the most, my hero when I was little, the woman who gave up so much for me, was gone. My sister will never be my maid of honor. I will never get to share another secret with her. Samantha will never be able to live her dreams. She'll never drive around the world in her bright blue Mustang. She will never get to take care of the animals of SeaWorld or Newport. My mom will never get to meet her grandkids. She will never help me plan a wedding. She will never get to go to England or Ireland and walk around the lands of our ancestors. And I will never get to tell her she was right. She was right about everything, that I would always need her. I miss them more than anything in the world. No one realizes just how much I wish I could trade places with them. Samantha had so much potential that she will never get to realize. I would give anything to hear Samantha sing again. I would give anything to tell my mom just how much she influenced me. Every now and then I hear her in the back of my mind reminding me of all the things she tried to instill in me when I was growing up. I smile every time I think of my family in heaven. My mom keeping track of my dad playing jokes with my sister fighting back with my dad, and then finding whatever animals she can. I imagine Samantha takes care of all the animals in heaven. I imagine my mom is doing her best to educate all the children in heaven, and I imagine that my dad is doing his best to drive them both nuts. The people who are in every painting I ever painted and everything I ever wrote are gone, and I don't know why. Which is why my family and I have decided to raise the reward to $50,000. We have done this in hopes of finding answers. If you know something, I am begging you to please come forward. Please give us closure.
If the area around Bardstown wasn't already shocked following the murder of Officer Jason Ellis, then they definitely were now. Within a calendar year, 2 heinous crimes had plagued residents of this closely knit region, and answers had eluded investigators looking into both crimes. Now, in addition to police officers being gunned down in the streets, special education teachers and high school students were being savagely murdered inside their own homes. Soon, it became apparent that, just like the investigation into the ambush of Officer Jason Ellis, state investigators looking into the murders of Kathy and Samantha Netherland were stumped. Their only real clue seemed to be the black Chevy Impala caught leaving the scene. Screenshots of that vehicle had produced dozens, if not hundreds, of tips, but none of those led to any viable leads. There were roughly 20,000 vehicles that matched the vehicle's description in the state of Kentucky alone, and with the states of Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois so close by, the possibilities were endless. To this day, it remains unknown who targeted Kathy and Samantha Netherland, or why. It is believed that at least 2 culprits were involved, but their potential motive remains unknown. A group of retired detectives were brought in to oversee a relaunched investigation in 2017, which included reviewing other local cases, such as the death of Officer Jason Ellis. These retired Kentucky State Police investigators began poring over the cold cases plaguing the region of Bardstown, which included not only the 3 murders I've covered so far, but a strange disappearance the very next year that brought Bardstown to national headlines. That story, like the murder of Kathy and Samantha Netherland, remains unresolved. Thank you for listening to this episode of Unresolved. This episode continues my Bardstown Revisited series, which is taking a second look at stories I originally covered back in 2016. This episode in particular has been significantly changed and expanded, with me originally glossing over the Netherland case in just a few minutes. I've always felt really bad about that, and wanted to do a more detailed look at the case. I hope I did the Netherlands and their story justice, which has really stuck with me since I originally read about it, close to 4 years ago. God damn, where does the time go? Anyhow, if any of you would like to stay in touch with the podcast, make sure to look it up on social media. Just search for Unresolved or Unresolved Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and it should pop up for you. You can send in any emails to michael@unresolved.me. That's michael@unresolved.me. And you could send in any voicemails or text to 831-200-3550. If you want to find a transcript of this episode, or any applicable links or sources, just head to the podcast website, which is unresolved.me. Each story has an entire write-up, and I list all my sources down at the bottom, so if you want to find out where I found this information and, specific quotes, you could find it all there. You could also find a link to the podcast store at the top of the page, as well as a link to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/unresolvedpod. Next week, we'll bring about perhaps the most explosive Bardstown story to date, the disappearance of Crystal Rogers, and the events that followed. This is another one of the stories I glossed over a few years back, but I'm going to be going into much more detail. I also may or may not be publishing tiny little interlude episodes during the week, which will provide context about the story and Bardstown, which I would otherwise be hard-pressed to include in each episode. So be on the lookout for those. Until then, everyone, stay safe, and I will talk to you later.